And then to go deeper and to realize I'm not what I do, I'm something else, and I'm going to find out what that is. So the burnout gives them not just permission, but there's almost a requirement, unless some people just want to get better and go back. But the ones that take it seriously really have to go a little deeper to find out where their true joy is, and not what they do, because what do you do? Well, that depends.
Welcome to the podcast that's all about deepening our self-awareness with profound self-compassion. I'm Henny. I write, coach, and speak about how exploring our inner world can transform how we experience our outer world, all founded on a bedrock of self-love. Settle in and listen and see where the episode takes you. My guest today is psychotherapist, writer, international trainer, and world expert in imagery-based therapies, Dr. Dina Glouberman. The co-founder and director since 1979, so it's been running for over 40 years, of Skyros Holistic Holidays. Dina is also the founder-director of the Aurora Centre in southern Italy, where she trains therapists, counsellors and consultants in ImageWork. This conversation today is a frank and generous exploration of what led Dina to develop her pioneering ImageWork therapy, touching on painful stories from her past and revealing the transformation that can come from purposeful exploration of imagery and visualisation. At the end of our conversation, Dina says, "We're all in this together." To me, that feels like the most fitting phrase. It sums up the deep connection Dina offers those who work with her, and it speaks to our universal connection with others and with ourselves. I'm so honoured to be sharing this conversation with you. Dina is one of my own teachers, as you'll hear in the conversation, and I have found that the application of ImageWork is absolutely transformational in the work that I do with my own clients and in the way that I have experienced ImageWork personally. I can't wait to share this conversation with you. It is wide and deep, just like the world of the imagination. So, Dina, welcome.
Thank you, Honey. It's always lovely to talk to you.
Yeah, same. It's really, and do you know what? It's interesting. Before I opened up the call and I was thinking about this conversation, I realised I felt a bit nervous. And I was reflecting on well, why is that? And then I came to the conclusion it's because it's important. This conversation feels valuable and it feels important. And so anything that's got kind of resonance brings an emotion with it for me. So I just wanted to share that, really.
Thank you. It does feel important.
Yeah.
And it's important to share it with you because I think you're kind of present on a deep level.
Yeah, well, it takes one to know one, I'd say.
Yeah, it's a tough place to be, but we're doing it.
Yeah. So in the intro, I shared a very brief bit about you and the work that you do and the fact that you're a psychotherapist and you founded Skyros and you're also an author. And I also shared that I am currently studying with you, although that our program is obviously due to end really soon. So this kind of, the timing of this feels really good as well for me, that it's almost like a sort of point of closure in that part of our connection with each other, although hopefully it will go on much longer. But I have, the whole time we've been working together, I've been really, really mindful of the role that ImageWork plays in enabling people to deepen that self-awareness that they have of what's important for them, what's driving them, the belief systems that they have, etc. And as I said to you before we began, I am really fascinated in the role that self-compassion also plays in that process of gaining self-awareness. And I suppose my sort of first question for you is, does that feel true for you as well? Is self-compassion something that has kind of featured in the work that you do or the stuff that you've experienced in your life? Has it been like a conscious thing? Because it feels very present for me when I'm with you, that compassion is part of it.
Well, it's a really interesting question. So I'll just tell you, my first thought is that when we speak the language of the culture, which are the words and the numbers and so on, we're speaking the conventional wisdom of the culture in some way, and that when we go deeper and we get imagery, we're speaking a universal, but also our personal language. And so it's a way of being on our own side, in a way. It's a way of understanding the images that are guiding our lives and understanding them. When I say personal and universal, in a way, it's saying that which is just personal to me is not just personal to me. It's also got a universal meaning. And so, when I was younger, my big thing was a search for truth. And I just, and actually when I came to England, it was because, in large part, because I was looking to find out how other cultures saw life, because I'd spent some time in Israel and discovered that people thought differently. And I thought, well, if people think differently in different cultures, how do you know what's true? I was looking for this sort of absolute truth, which of course, it's not out there. And I think when I started working with the imagery, I found that I could look for my own personal and universal truth. And that carried me through my whole life, all the difficulties, all the visioning, all the understanding, all the insights, all the kind of wonderful moments. And it's also been the thing that's helped me help other people who are very relieved again to find their own images instead of there's a level at which, when you speak the language of the culture, you're an observer of your own experience, and maybe there's some judgment about it, and some of the negative words we use come from the culture. Even though we don't believe in them, we find ourselves calling ourselves names. I'm a failure. I've never been any good. All this kind of thing people say. But when you kind of explore your own imagery, say, for example, I'm saying I'm a failure. I can't create anything now. But if I go inside and I say, I have an image, I'm a tree, and I haven't got any fruits this year. What's happened? How did I stop having fruits? Suddenly I'm in an experience that is making sense of things without judgment.
So I love
following the clues, let's say.
I love that phrase, making sense of things without judgment, because so often I feel, and just sort of reflecting back on that, your point around the culture, it's almost like we sort of carry the stories of the culture or the environment that we grew up in. And this idea of making sense of things immediately brings us up here into the kind of prefrontal cortex and the logical mind and, rationality, making sense. But the way that you've just described it is about sort of making sense almost like with the heart or with that deeper wisdom.
Yeah, absolutely. And with and what I would say, it's with your heart and soul and your larger mind, because we have the control mind that goes yabba, 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 and which keeps us so-called rational. But when we sink into another level, we still have a mind, but it's a larger mind. It's a more universal mind. And the imagery is part of that. And so the imagery, we use the imagery first to illuminate what I call our everyday imagery is. What are the images that are underlying our experience, which may be outdated or negative or not good for us? But first we have to find them. And then, so for example, if I get an image of a bird that's flying in a really confused way and can't get its bearings. So that is what's going on now. And maybe it turns out that the bird's been hit by something, and maybe in real life it was hit by someone saying something awful to them or something. So I'm identifying first what's going on. And then I start working with it. And I say, okay, if I were a light from above, what would I say to that bird? I'd say, oh, you've just got badly hurt. Don't keep flying. Just rest and see what happens. So we start to move through the place that we're at with an image that's maybe jarring or painful or comes from the past or from our childhood. And we try to bring it into a bigger picture with, as you say, with compassion. It is really, I hadn't thought of it that way, but it is all about compassion, because we're saying it's okay for you to be as you are, and there is a way forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also, there's this place of non-judgment in that it's okay, whatever image comes up. I know one of the sort of instructions or invitations is to accept the first image that comes to mind, even if we don't like it, or even if we're confused by it, or think it's an unattractive thing, whatever it might be. Go with it and don't judge.
Absolutely. And you find that has gold in it if we bring it to the surface and if we start to work with it. I remember I once had an image of being a tin can that was kicked around. Of course, I wanted to get rid of it, but because I kept it on, I started to explore what was going on, what I needed to do about it, and so on. So I almost think the worse the image, the more the gold in it,
Mm-hmm.
But that may be just might not be true, I don't know.
Well, no judgment. I was reminded, as you said, as we were just talking about that, of the first time I took myself through an ImageWork exercise. I think before we began working on the diploma, and the image I had, or the kind of sense of the image, because that's one of the things I'd like to touch on at some point, actually, is it's not necessarily about images, pictures. It can also be the sort of sense of something. And so I had this sense of some salmon swimming in a river. And I was completely nonplussed by these salmon. And it was just this short patch of river. And I found it a bit boring, this image. And I stayed with it because that was the guidance. And as I explored it more and panned out, I realized I wasn't the salmon, I was actually the river. And the salmon were these thoughts endlessly swimming upstream. And as the river, I was just holding them stuck in place. And as I panned out and became consciousness looking down, I realized actually as a river, I had this beginning that stretched all the way back and this ending that stretched all the way forward. And I'd lost sight of the fact that I had this sort of length and breadth and depth to me. And that the salmon were just being salmon. They were just doing their thing. And when I let them go, they would move on and other salmon would come and that would be fine. And so that place of like trusting the process, I think, is also a huge part of the compassion, the non-judgment.
And I would say that you're also the salmon.
And also,
but you're also the salmon, you're also the river, and that we are multi-level, and that's really wonderful.
And I was also the willow tree that looked down on the river.
Absolutely. And each one has a quality that we can recognize. Because the salmon is going somewhere, isn't it?
Going home.
Yeah. And I think you recognize that about your experiences. And when the river is flowing endlessly, and that also you recognize. And I don't know about the willow, but there was something about that that's also an aspect of you. And it's really wonderful to know that we're not this simple, boring, I'm like this, I'm like that, but I'm all these things and more, and so are you. And how amazing to know you, you know. Kind of.
There's something in that about labels, and I think this sort of touches on what you were saying earlier as well, about the culture, the language of the culture, that we can end up carrying all of these labels about ourselves. And, you know, a conversation that people often have is like, you know, how much they hate the question about what do you do, because it's this narrow, constraining label. And
you know, when I grew up in America, one of the questions they used to ask at a party is, what do you make? Meaning, how much do you earn?
Well, obviously, as a British girl, I was like shocked.
But what's really interesting, as you know, I wrote a book about burnout, and it's called The Joy of Burnout, because it's about people eventually finding their joy. But the really painful thing people talk about, who have been committed to what I call, you know, they're like this with the golden eggs. They have all these achievements and so on. And the really painful thing is going to a party and being asked, what do you do? And at the moment that they're burnt out, they're not doing anything. And it's a real moment of truth to feel the shame of that. I can't answer that question. And then to go deeper and to realize I'm not what I do, I'm something else. And I'm going to find out what that is. You know, so the burnout gives them not just permission, but there's almost a requirement, unless some people just want to get better and go back. But the ones that take it seriously really have to go a little deeper to find out where their true joy is, and not what they do, you know, because what do you do? Well, that depends.
I have a very personal resonance with that. So I think I hit my first burnout. I know I hit my first burnout at university.
Wow.
And ended up dropping out for a year. Yeah, I was an early starter, you know, early starter. And you know, learn a huge amount from that experience. I knew I needed to make a change, because I heard myself crossing the road and I heard the voice in my head say, if only a car could hit me just enough that I end up in hospital for a while, but I don't die. And I got to the other side of the road and I thought, something needs to change here.
Did you notice that? This is what people would say to me. That's what people think. if only I could end up in hospital with those lovely white sheets and not have to do anything and not have to go to work. But they couldn't say no to work. They had to have the accident, you know. So it's good you were listening.
Well, I did listen, and I dropped out of university for a year, but I did go back, which was even more sort of surprising. And then I hit another one when I was in my late 30s, and then the one that really, when the universe and my body worked really together and decided this time she's got to bloody well listen. So that was in 2016 when I really almost didn't make it through. So that experience of burnout.
You almost died of?
So I had pneumonia 3 times that year.
Wow.
And the third bout, I ended up with another virus was trying to shut down all my internal organs, and I had sepsis.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, isolation suite, still on my phone answering work emails. So, you know, when you said at the beginning, but actually I think it was before we started recording, and you said, oh, you know, you're a real go-getter or something, you get things done. Drug of choice is work.
But tell me something. You said there was something you needed to learn, and you're gonna do you know what it was through all of those?
A number of things, I think, but
level. What was it that you were?
Self-compassion.
It was self-compassion, and that's why you've made that your life's work. Yeah, and I think that's the sort of beautiful thing that people do. The generosity, that whatever they have suffered from, they want to make sure that other people, if they can help it, if you can help it, you don't want other people to suffer from what you suffered from. And so you at your life's work. You know.
And so that feels like a really beautiful question to turn to you, actually, because having read your book, Into the Woods and Out Again, and read of some of the experiences that you've had, sorry about that. It feels to me like so much of your life work has been inspired by the pain, the beauty and the pain of what you've experienced. And so what would you say is the thing that you are offering out into the world to support others from having to experience?
Is there one thing? I mean, it's an interesting question, because there's the method, which is teaching people how to use their deepest imagery to understand themselves, to deal with their difficulties, to create their life afresh, because that's what I used to get me through really difficult times. And what was amazing was that I would just make up a weird sort of image thing, a house of truth, or seemed to me I was making it up, a house of truth, or pulling back the energy like spaghetti from someone, strange things. And then I would try them with other people, and they worked. So it was like, oh, there is a universal quality to these images. They are mine, but they're also universal. So on one level, I was teaching people the way, the methods I used on my own, mainly to get myself not just through, but through in a creative way, and to be able to create wonderful things, which I had the privilege of doing. But on another level, I find that people I meet will tell me things they've never told anyone. That's not because of the imagery. I think it's because they feel, as someone said, that I would be unshockable, that I would be unjudgmental, that I would just listen and say, oh, yes, I know what you mean, of course. And I have this expression which people really resonate with, of looking at people and yourself with compassion for your pain and limitation and respect for your magnificence at the same time. And I think that is like a great lesson for people to learn, because when we're feeling bad, then we are bad, then we're no good, then nobody would love me. You know, all the negative stuff happens. But for someone to say, I can see your suffering and I have compassion for that, and I also know that you're amazing at the same time. And I discovered this when I was working with people's fears of the future, because I discovered that their fear of the future, I mean, say it was it being poverty and sitting under the arches. It turned out it wasn't that they didn't have money and were under the arch. It turned out that it was because they collapsed and forgot who they were. And that was the thing they were afraid of. So my method of dealing with it was to take the person, the present person, into the future picture and look at that person with compassion and also respect for their magnificence. And the person would wake up and say, oh, I'm not just a poor slob under the arches. You know, I'm a creative person. I can manage this. So maybe on the deepest level, it is teaching people that compassion for their pain and limitation doesn't mean that they're not magnificent. It's that they are both, and that we are all both, and that someone who's going through hell is going through hell, but that doesn't make them any less magnificent. And that is a really amazing thing to know. And I think it's a relief to people. It's a great relief. I remember once when I had this experience of realizing that the difficult things and the good things were like the cocktail of being me. And it wasn't that I was bad when I felt bad. You know, when I realized I just got high, I thought, oh, I can do anything then, you know.
It's definitely been one of the big learnings for me in the months that we've been working together, is this well, I mean, I think I described it actually in one of the practice sessions that we did, is there is room for pain and joy. That's how it kind of felt that it translated inside me. Was that I have room for pain and joy. The joy doesn't have to be pushing the pain away, and the pain doesn't have to overwhelm the joy. There is room for both. And so, yes, I hear that the resonance of what you're saying, that is the thing that sits underneath. And it immediately prompts a question for me, like, as you were growing up, who gave you that experience of seeing you in your magnificence and respect for your pain?
It's an interesting question. And did I think it was only sort of under the surface, but I have a feeling that my father understood me and saw who I was, because I was like him in some ways, you know. So after doing Skyros and creating this wonderful world, and knowing that would have been his, you know, he would have wanted something like that. And I said to him, how do you feel? And my father was very brilliant and creative, but also very socially unskilled. He was probably ADD, all the things we didn't know about, you know. He was probably hyperactive, you know, all these things that stop people from achieving what they want to. And I said, how do you feel that you couldn't fulfill that great potential of yours. He said, well, I feel okay because I feel like you've done it, because that's what I would have liked to do. So I think my father had that something of the quality of going deep into the personal and the universal, especially the universal. I think he had that quality, but it was never nourished in him. So it was only when he was older that he started to understand himself better, So I think that might be, I remember I had a cousin whose lap I used to sit on, and I think that was amazing that someone wanted me to sit on their lap. But my family was a difficult family because I had a sister that died probably while I was just conceived, and therefore there was a feeling in the family that things were not right and that I wasn't the one they were waiting for in a way, because I wasn't her. I think that now. I didn't know about her then.
I was there's an awful lot in your book, Into the Woods and Out Again, which is immensely moving. And I have to say, having read it gave me, I felt like I had a much deeper understanding of where ImageWork came from and the source of what you've just been talking about in terms of respect for pain and magnificence. And you obviously, and listening to what you said about sort of searching for truth, that being a kind of mission that you went on, and then this recognition that the truth actually sits inside. As I say this, I've got this image of this map, this kind of map of the world, and watching Zohar kind of, traveling around and doing this inner world exploration as well as the material world exploration.
Yeah.
And you talk really candidly about your psychotic episode that you experienced in your 20s. And I'm curious about what that taught you about managing this distinction between the image world and the material world, and how to kind of hold that delicate balance between the two to ensure that you get the most from both, I suppose.
Yeah. So I think, for example, when I was in college, I had a professor who wanted us to explore our dreams. And so he taught us a method which was very powerful, of that you wake up, but you try not to even open your eyes. And with your eyes closed, you write the dream down. And as I wrote these dreams out, I began to really be involved with them because I started remembering them more. It really was a powerful method. And then one day I thought, well, why do people think that reality is more important than the dream world? It's just that there's continuity in the one and not the other, but we spend a lot of time, and I heard this question and I said, oh, that, if I believe that, I must be crazy, And I stopped. I stopped doing it. I didn't hand in the paper and so on and so forth. So it was kind of like that way madness lies, when you don't know the difference between, and what I learned when I started working, and what happens when you're psychotic is you don't distinguish between which things are in the real world and which things are your imagination, some of which is not for the reason people think. Some of which is because you've lost your assumptions about how things work. So, for example, I was hearing, I said to someone, the wall is talking. Now, that sounds crazy, but she walked up to the wall and saw that there was a radio and the microphone was off the hook. So the wall was talking, but a sane person would have known walls don't talk. But I thought it was just as possible that walls talk than walls don't talk, So some of the reason is because I had lost all the assumptions about what was right and what was wrong, what was real and what wasn't real. But when I learned to work with the imagery, what I learned was that you have to hold the two worlds separate, and you can go into the magical image world. So I could say I'm a tree, and I haven't got leaves or fruits, as I was saying earlier, and I can absolutely be that tree. But somewhere inside, I know that there's a real world going on outside me, and that if anything happened, I could go back. I could, in an instant, I could leave the tree behind and go back into the real world. And then if I want to go back into the tree, I can also leave the real world behind. But I know that both are there. And I know, moreover, that I am experiencing this world not for its own sake, but for the sake, it's a wonderful experience, but that's not why I do it. I do it in order to understand and enrich my everyday life, my way of organizing my reality. So if I just went and I had this wonderful experience of trees, and, for example, your river, a wonderful experience being a river, but that it didn't stop there. You knew that had a meaning for you, and that you were going to, and those meanings that come from that change people's lives. So yeah.
It's so two things come up for me there. One is a really strong sense that it's purposeful. When we enter into that world, it's purposeful. And there's also, it feels like there's something really beautiful around the idea of, it's also about suspension of disbelief, because that's part of it, isn't it? Is this the trust in what you're seeing, trust in the experience, throw away what's on top of your mind, suspension of disbelief, and simultaneously suspension of belief in all the stuff that you've been fed through your life and all the stuff that goes on in the material world.
But the material world is still there.
It's still there, but it's suspension of belief in the stories, in the narrative that you might be carrying. So actually that for me it really feels like that. It feels like you are in this sort of suspended place, or that kind of liminal space where it's possible to see things differently.
Yes. And if you are willing to, so I want to give an example of people not being willing to. So, for example, a very common image people have, and we're talking about the image as metaphor. There are many other uses of imagery, but the visioning and so on. But I'm thinking of a man on a course I was teaching in a business, who had this image of being a lion in a cage. And it's a very common image. And always there's either the door's really open, or there's a key, or it's a little bit like in burnout. People think they're trapped, but they aren't trapped. So always there's a way out of that. I have never experienced anybody who's in a cage and they don't find a way out. But this particular man was the only person I ever saw who, as the lion went out of the cage and then fell asleep. So he didn't want to explore that world. And this man complained about me in that business. I don't even know what he said, but he complained about me because he obviously thought I was dangerous. And so he refused to follow through. He didn't go back into the cage, he just fell asleep. So, we often say to people, don't go back to sleep. And that means don't go back into the lack of awareness that you've chosen, And it's also true that when you say doing visioning of the future and you get an image of the future, again, you need to, as you talk about this suspension of disbelief, you need to forget what you want, because if you, and the way I do it, I have people picture a positive future and a negative future, because I want them to see what will take them down the pathway they don't want to go down, and what will help them get where they really want to be. And if you're stuck on saying, I want to see this, I want a future where I have this boyfriend, or I have this amount of money, or I have this house, or whatever, then you haven't got the freedom to find out what would really make you happy. So again, when you're going into the future, you need to forget everything you want. Which part of you wants it? Your conscious, rational mind wants, and just say, let me see what the rest of me has to say. And then we find out that, for example, if I'm running, I'd be running a course and thinking, what I want is for people to learn as much as possible. And then I would say, well, I would do the exercise, because I do my own exercise. That's really important. And I say, it's the end of the group and I feel awful. What's the awful feeling? I'm exhausted, and so is everybody else, because we're all trying to learn everything there is to know, And then I say, well, the positive future, at the end of the group, and I feel great. What's the feeling? I feel so relaxed, and we've connected to each other. And that's how the learning came. So the thing I thought was my goal would have made me unhappy. And the thing that I wasn't conscious of was what I needed, the connection. And that has also informed a lot of my work with people, because I always start with the connection, because I realize that if people are not in connection, they're not going to be able to go deep into their inner life. They need to know that people need to know they're held. So I can teach you 1,000 things. It won't go deep. But if I say to you, I'm here for you, I've got your back, would you like to find out what's going on for you? Then something different happens.
And in those words speaks volumes of compassion.
Yeah.
I think that, without that, it's almost like the kind of, the sort of cradle that holds us. Without that, then it's very hard for us to let go enough to be able to allow change to happen, because we're so sort of rigidly stuck.
Yeah.
In
And
self-protection.
I'd say the compassion is also held in the connection. I think the word connection is very important. And I for example, I just had a client who, when I had a sense of her, I had this image of her standing outside a room, which was a real, it just came to me, it's what I call tuning in, get a sense of something, but it turned out it really happened. Her mother was holding her sister, and both of them were close to each other and looking at her accusingly, because somehow it was her fault that they felt the way they felt. And she was left out and accused. So she says, when she tries to connect to somebody and they close down and don't connect, she hasn't got a way of counteracting those awful feelings she had at the time. But the minute she feels a connection and that someone knows who she is, then they melt away. And so she's working on finding a way not to be so dependent on somebody who might not be able to connect, But the point is that by nature, the minute you connect to someone and feel kinship, everything is different.
And that speaks to me of that connection with self, with a capital S.
Absolutely.
And because, and certainly in my own journey, it was that I think saved me, was this realization that inside me there is this sort of immense well of love that I can draw on forever, and it will never ever run dry. Makes me quite emotional saying that, because it's meaningful. But this sense
it's not something everybody knows. In fact, I would say most people don't know that.
No.
And a lot of the spiritual traditions are all about reminding people of that. But that would have saved you, I can imagine.
It really did. It really did. And my sense is that that's also possibly part of what saved you as well, was this sense of that deep inner connection with self.
I think whenever I got stuck in having just the external world, I went a bit crazy. And I sort of had to have an inner world that made sense of the outer world. I had to have that. And when I lost that connection, I got too involved in the external world. For example, something's going wrong and I'm going nuts. This goes wrong and that goes wrong. And I'm never going to find the answer out there. But when I go back inside, and maybe I get an image for myself, or maybe I just settle in myself or whatever, and I trust that there is a way through, I suddenly say, oh yeah, I have to do this or that, but I can't do it just in the external world. I think some people can. I think some people are better at that than me, but I always have to go back inside, or have that possibility of going inside when things are really troubling in the external world. I have to find my way through the meanings rather than the external story.
And I think that's what you're what you've created through ImageWork, and the way it can be used and applied is the beauty within it is that it is so accessible, because often what we're talking about feels very esoteric, it feels nebulous, it feels, oh, that's for other people. But even in the short time that I've been consciously using what I now call ImageWork, as opposed to sort of naturally using some elements of it because they felt useful for me before I started sort of studying with you, I see that the application of it across, I don't think I've got a client that I haven't used some aspect of ImageWork with, because it's so accessible.
So which are if you think about these different clients, what are the different ways you've used it? Because that's quite interesting to hear.
So often it will be the simplicity of noticing some of their language and then just saying, okay, so what image does that conjure up for you? And then kind of exploring the image just sort of in the moment in that way. But also doing some of the longer exercises, the very sort of focused exercises. I think what I've found tends to come up more than anything is other relational ones. So whether that is inner child or saying goodbye, saying hello, sort of relational ones where people are actually connecting with someone where they've got difficulty and being able to resolve that difficulty with someone who's living or dead. And also around where people are stuck at crossroads, and so often it's that language that comes up, and it's just, people use visual language all the time as well. My alertness to that is so heightened now. And how there's something about the way that you have recognized that it's okay to explore the negative future or the negative past, negative inverted commas, and as well as the positive, because in order to open up people's awareness of what all the options are and to stop people getting stuck in what they think they should be doing, that I've found to be really helpful, particularly when somebody is at the crossroads and they're exploring kind of different options that are open to them.
I tell this story at the beginning of my most recent and my last book, ImageWork, which is teaching image work to practitioners. That how I came to write that book was it was COVID lockdown, and I just didn't know what I was going to do with my life. It didn't feel like anything made any sense anymore, because everything I had believed, we'd all believed was normal, was disrupted in this surrealistic way. And I couldn't imagine writing a book. I had thought about writing a book before, but how could you write a book? Who's going to read a book? It's like we're in this amazing situation. And so I took my own, it was actually a CD, and which I think the CDs are coming back again, actually. So, and I played this future exercise, and I did the negative future first. And the negative future, I found myself unable to breathe because I was so ashamed. And because I felt I'd wasted the year, I'd achieved nothing, I'd created nothing. I had just wasted my time. I suppose for me, when I don't create anything, it feels like a waste. And the positive future, I was holding this book. And the thing that exercise did with the positive future told me what I wanted, but it was the negative future that frightened the hell out of me and made me realize that I couldn't just sit around and do nothing because the world had changed, because I was going to end up unable to breathe. That was it was actually physically, I thought, I can't breathe. That was how real the image was. And so I started on the book proposal the next day, and I wrote that book that year. I was here in Italy, and it was the year of COVID and lockdown. And that's when I wrote the book, because I knew I had to, because I'd seen the two futures. And if I'd only done the positive future, I don't know whether that would have been enough. I think it wouldn't have been. Because yes, that's a good idea. So what? But yes, it's a good idea. But if I don't, there'll be hell to pay.
So I ran just before Christmas. I ran an event here at our farm in Herefordshire, and we did the space and time ship exercise. So I had 10 people here,
which was this exercise I've done, yeah.
Which is the same exercise, and as you say, sort of as a practitioner, you're doing the exercise with the people that you're working with. You're particularly, I think, in that group environment. And when we were talking about how far ahead in the future are you going to take your space and time ship, out of my mouth came 30 years.
Wow.
So I'm 53, and I was like, that's a long way into the future, but okay, that's what came up. So, and that negative future image, that is not something I want to be moving toward. So I very much
Tell us what it was, or you can keep that to yourself.
Well, I was shuffling around here. I was at the farm, shuffling about. The house had fallen into complete disrepair. I was living in the kitchen, sort of on a kind of pallet, sleeping on a pallet in front of the Argo, which actually to me sounds quite nice, but but it was all really grubby, and I mean, like, completely fallen apart. And physically, I was dressed in really grubby, like food stained, dirty clothes. It's like, and I was so lonely. I was so lonely. There was no one came to see me, and I'd shut everybody out. And in the positive future, I was in this room. This is a converted stable that was a wreck of a building when we first moved here. And I was sitting at a table just there, looking out of the window, writing a book. And there were two people here who were kind of working with me in some way. I wasn't quite sure kind of what their jobs were. Anton was pushing a wheelbarrow somewhere up the garden, and there was a big tent in one of the fields with other people running an ImageWork exercise.
Oh, and could you see, because one of the important things about this is to see the difference. What got you? What did you have to do, or what attitude was it that brought you to the negative future, and what brought you to the positive?
It was self-belief brought me to the positive.
Yeah.
Faith, actually. Faith in what we're creating.
And the negative future?
And the negative future was I gave up hope.
So you gave up hope, and then hope deserted you, really. Can't give it up without it giving you up, I suppose. Yeah. Wow. So you know what you have to do then.
Yeah, keep the faith.
Yeah.
Oh, Dina, Zohar.
It's worth saying about Zohar, because Zohar is my birth name, and it means shining light, and it's the main book of the Kabbalah, which is the book of esoteric wisdom. But I was given that at birth, and I was never called that because I thought it seemed to be such a weird name. My middle name was Diane, and then that got translated into Hebrew form, which was Dina, and I was called Dina most of my life. And my books are all under the name Dina, but at about age 60, I said, I'll have to go back to my birth name, which is actually very confusing because, if you have everybody singing your happy birthday, they say your name and it's just a hodgepodge. Dina's. When I send an email, I don't know what, so I've started saying Zohar Dina. But anyway, you know me as Zohar now, but you originally knew me as my books are under the name Dina Glouberman, and my website.
Yeah. I will share. I'll share links. And I think the other thing as well, just to say, is that you are running the diploma again next year. So the course that I've been studying with you.
Yes. Yes, and I'm looking forward to anyone who's a practitioner who would like to learn about how to use imagery in their work, which, as you have said, is invaluable. And if you go onto my website, which is very simply dinaglouberman.com, and look under the courses, you'll find that diploma course and everything you need to know. So if any of you listening are inspired, please just look at my website and see how it sounds to you.
Yeah. And, from my experience, I think it's invaluable for practitioners in terms of deepening the support and and adding breadth, I suppose, to their toolkit in the way that they can support clients and themselves as well. Because, gosh, I have been on a bit of a journey, as you know. through this process.
Yes, I think that's the part of this compassion thing, I think, is that I say to people, don't use exercises you haven't tried on yourself first, because otherwise you will see them kind of a little bit at one remove, like you're a little bit superior or something. But once you've been through hell yourself, or not, maybe, but once you've been through the experience, then you've got that kinship.
Yeah.
With them as they go through it. And I'm sure you have that with your clients, this feeling, we're all in this together.
And gosh, I mean, what a lovely phrase to close on, actually, because aren't we just? We're all in this together.
Yeah. So thank you. It's been wonderful. I have to give a plug for you, Henny, because it's been really wonderful working with you. And what sticks in my mind is every time anybody says, less is more, you say, no, more is more. I want more. And it's that passionate more that is so wonderful, because it's this appetite for learning and for living.
Yes. Yeah. Appetite for learning and living. I think that is very important.
Yeah, learning, living, and laughing.
Oh, learning, living, and loving. Let's add all the L's. All right. I'm so glad that you could join me.
Yeah.
Gorgeous.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been a great experience.
What a gorgeous way to spend an hour of time being with Dina. And I don't know if you could tell, but there was something about the quality of the way Dina thinks and works, which really challenges you to get your own mind working in a more explorative and creative way. So I feel really stimulated after that conversation, and I hope you've really enjoyed listening to her as well. And I want to share that obviously, as Dina says, the diploma is running again next year. So if you're a practitioner, a counsellor, a therapist, and you want to use ImageWork in your work with your clients, with your patients, then do take a look at the website, and all the links are in the notes. And then the other thing is that I've actually got an event coming up on June the 17th, which is a morning of exploring an ImageWork exercise. It's called Wisdom from Within, and it's an invitation to meet with an inner guide. We all have multiple inner guides in our imagination, and through a guided practice with me to go and explore, having an interaction with your own inner guide, or that connection that Dina talks about. So there's a link in the notes. If you're on the mailing list, then I'll include a link in the email that I send out, or have a search for me on Eventbrite. And just look for Henny Flynn, and you should be able to see the event on the 17th of June. So I will leave you here, and as ever, I send you so much love, and I look forward to being with you again next week. All right, take care, my darlings. I send you a hug and a wave.